Clara stood outside the glass doors of the small-town bank, the afternoon sun pressing heavily against her back. She paused, clutching a worn envelope to her chest. Inside was the last paycheck her father had ever earned, not much, but enough to cover the preacher, the casket, and the modest headstone she longed to place over his grave. Her father had worked at the mill for 37 years. Every morning, he rose before dawn, laced his boots, and left without complaint. Now, Clara carried the final fruit of his labor, as if it were his last gift to her. With a steadying breath, she walked in. The bank smelled faintly of polished wood and old carpet, a place where silence seemed to have rules of its own. People in line shifted papers, adjusted ties, or checked their watches. Clara smoothed the creases of her faded dress. Though she wore no jewelry, there was a quiet dignity in the way she carried herself, as if the weight of her grief had carved her into something stronger, more resolute. When her turn came, she stepped forward to the counter. Behind it sat Mr. Whitman, the bank's longtime manager. His hair was silver and neatly parted, his suit pressed with precision. His reputation preceded him, a man who respected policy above people, rules above reason. He did not smile when Clara approached. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled the check from its envelope. The ink on her father's name was still sharp, bold. She slid it across the polished counter as though she were laying down something sacred. "I'd like to cash this, please," she said, her voice soft but steady. Mr. Whitman picked up the slip of paper with gloved detachment. His eyes flicked over it, then up to Clara. In that moment, their gazes met. Hers full of unspoken hope and weary determination, his cool, guarded, and already drawing a line in the sand. He tapped the check once against the desk, then set it down with a sigh that seemed rehearsed. "We don't cash checks like this here," he said flatly. No explanation, no offer of alternatives. Just the finality of a door slammed shut. The word struck Clara harder than she expected. It wasn't just about the money, it was about her father's honor. His name, his work, his last effort written on that piece of paper, dismissed as though it were worthless. She blinked, forcing back the heat rising behind her eyes. Around them, the bank seemed to pause. A woman filling out a deposit slip glanced up. A man waiting in line shifted uneasily. The air thickened, heavy with a silence that carried more than policy, it carried history, prejudice, and an invisible weight that had followed Clara all her life. Still, she stood tall, her voice measured, her dignity unshaken. "Sir, this is my father's last paycheck. I need it for his funeral." Mr. Whitman's jaw tightened. His pride, wrapped in rules and perhaps in something darker, refused to bend. His reply came sharper, colder. "I said, we don't cash these." And just like that. Clara's fingers curled slightly against the edge of the counter, steadying herself. She could feel the stares of others behind her, a quiet audience to a humiliation she wished were private. Her father's name, written in neat ink on the paycheck, lay untouched between them. It felt like more than paper now, it was his legacy, his dignity, the proof of every backbreaking hour he had given to the mill. She drew in a breath. Her voice was calm, almost too calm, like the steady edge of a blade. "Mr. Whitman," she said softly, "my father worked 37 years for this. All I'm asking is to cash what he earned." But Whitman leaned back in his chair, his lips tightening into a line that carried more than just stubbornness. His hands folded across his chest, a posture of immovable authority. "Mrs." He paused, looking down at the name on the check, Clara Johnson. "This bank doesn't process out-of-state checks. You'll have to take this somewhere else." Somewhere else. As if somewhere else was so simple. The nearest larger bank was 2 towns away, a journey Clara couldn't afford, not with funeral costs pressing and only a few dollars left in her purse. His words weren't just about policy, they were about dismissal. About sending her away. Clara swallowed hard, the sting of rejection pricking at her throat. "Sir," she tried again, her voice firm but respectful, "My father's funeral is tomorrow. This check is all I have to cover it. Please, I'm not asking for a favor, just for fairness." The room grew quieter. Even the ticking of the wall clock seemed louder. Customers shifted uncomfortably. A mother hushed her child, as though sensing the weight of the moment. But Whitman's pride rose higher. He leaned forward, his voice louder now, sharp enough for everyone to hear. "I said we don't cash these here. Rules are rules." The finality of his tone cracked something inside Clara. She felt a flush of heat on her cheeks, not from shame, but from anger. Not wild, shouting anger, but a deep, quiet fury born from years of watching doors close in her face. Her father had always told her to stand tall, to never bow her head, no matter how heavy the burden. And so, she lifted her chin, her eyes locking onto Whitman's with a fire he hadn't expected. "If rules cannot make room for mercy, then they are nothing but cages," she said softly, but her words carried across the room like a hymn. Gasps rippled quietly from those standing nearby. A man coughed into his fist, trying to mask his discomfort. A young soldier in uniform, waiting at the back of the line, leaned forward slightly, his gaze narrowing on the scene unfolding before him. Whitman shifted in his seat. For a moment, something flickered across his face, doubt, perhaps, or shame, but he buried it quickly. Pride is a stubborn armor, and he wore it like a shield. The check still lay there, a fragile bridge between two worlds. Clara's grief and dignity on one side, Whitman's pride and prejudice. The silence in the bank was thick enough to choke on. No one wanted to meet anyone else's eyes, yet every gaze was fixed on the counter where Clara and Mr. Whitman stood locked in quiet battle. The check, small and fragile, lay between them like a forgotten child. Clara refused to move. Her pride was not arrogance but survival, built over years of being told she wasn't enough, of watching her father work twice as hard for half the pay. She would not let this be just another dismissal. Not today. Whitman, meanwhile, sat stiffly in his chair, jaw set, hands clasped in front of him like a judge awaiting a guilty plea. His pride had hardened into a wall, one he wasn't ready to climb down from. And then, from the back of the line, came a voice. Calm, steady, but cutting through the silence like a crack of thunder. "Sir, with all due respect, that's not right." Heads turned. It was a young man in army fatigues, his uniform crisp, his boots still dusted with the red clay of home. His hair was freshly cropped, his face sunburned, but his eyes carried the weight of someone who had seen too much in too little time. Whitman frowned. "Excuse me." The soldier stepped forward, ignoring the murmurs around him. He pulled his wallet from his pocket and set his own military ID firmly on the counter, right beside Clara's check. "If trust is the issue," he said evenly, "you can run it through my account. Cash it under my name. She walks out with her father's money today." A hush fell over the bank. Customers shifted, some whispering, others nodding quietly to themselves. The act was simple, but it was bold, so bold it unsettled the room. Clara blinked, stunned. Her lips parted as if to protest, but no words came. The kindness, so unexpected, struck her harder than Whitman's rejection had. She pressed her hand to her chest, as if steadying her heart. Whitman stared at the ID, his eyes narrowing. "This isn't your check," he said slowly, his tone clipped. "Banking doesn't work like that. There are procedures." But the soldier didn't flinch. He leaned closer, his voice quiet but firm. "I've just come back from a war where men bled next to me, men of every color. Out there, we didn't ask about procedures before saving each other's lives. We just acted. Because it was right." The words landed heavy, reverberating against the walls. Even Whitman couldn't disguise the flicker of discomfort on his face. He glanced toward the line, saw the nods of agreement, the silent judgment of his customers. For once, the authority of his desk felt smaller than the truth standing in front of it. Clara's eyes glistened. She turned to the soldier, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't even know me." He smiled faintly, his expression soft. "Ma'am, I don't have to. Sometimes it's enough to know what's right." The bank was no longer quiet. The silence had changed. Not the silence of fear or shame, but the stillness that comes before something shifts, when everyone. Mr. Whitman's hand hovered above the counter, fingers drumming once against the polished wood. He could feel every pair of eyes in the bank pressing against him like a weight. For decades, he had built his reputation on being firm, unbending, and loyal to the rules. But now, with Clara's grief staring him down and the soldier's quiet courage challenging him, the walls of his pride began to crack. He looked at Clara again. Really looked this time. Not at her dress, not at the tremor in her hands, not even at the check itself, but at her eyes. And in them, he saw something he hadn't expected, not defiance, but pain. The kind of pain that humbles you. The kind that makes your own excuses sound small. Clara stood tall despite the tears threatening to spill. She didn't beg. She didn't plead. She simply waited, her father's dignity resting in the stillness between them. Whitman swallowed hard, but the lump in his throat didn't go away. His eyes flickered to the soldier's ID, then back to the woman in front of him. He realized, with a sharp pang, that the young man had risked nothing less than his honor for a stranger, while he, a man with power to help, had been hiding behind rules. His voice came, low at first. "I can't." But the words broke halfway, softer than he intended. He cleared his throat, shifted in his chair. His hand, once steady, trembled slightly as he reached for the stamp. The soldier didn't move, his gaze steady, silently daring Whitman to choose humanity. Whitman lowered his eyes, pressed the stamp onto the check, and slid it across the counter. His other hand reached into the drawer, pulling out the cash with a care that felt almost ceremonial. One by one, he counted the bills, his voice catching as he placed them gently in Clara's hand. The weight of the money was nothing compared to the weight of the moment. Clara stared down at it, her vision blurring. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Thank you." Whitman hesitated, his eyes burning now. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, so softly that only Clara and the soldier could hear. The words felt foreign in his mouth, but once spoken, they loosened something inside him, like a chain falling away. The room was still, but it was no longer tense. It was reverent. Customers who had been silent observers now looked at Clara with quiet respect, at the soldier with admiration, and even at Whitman with a strange relief. They had witnessed something rare, pride giving way to compassion. Clara tucked the bills into her purse with trembling hands. It wasn't just money anymore. It was proof that humanity could still bend, still break open in the right places. For the first time, Whitman's stern posture softened. His voice, once sharp as steel, was almost tender. "Your father, he must have been a good man." Clara's eyes filled, but she lifted her chin and nodded. "The best." And in that moment, for all the bank to see, Whitman lowered his guard. Clara stepped back from the counter, the folded bills safe in her purse but pressed closer still to her heart. The weight wasn't just currency, it was closure, a final honor to her father's years of labor. For a moment, she didn't move. She looked around the room, at the faces of strangers who had silently witnessed her battle. Some nodded, some smiled faintly, and some simply looked away, perhaps moved in ways they couldn't yet name. The soldier gave her a small, reassuring nod. It wasn't grand or dramatic, just the simple acknowledgement of two souls who had stood in truth together. Clara managed a trembling smile in return. She wanted to say more, to thank him properly, but her voice threatened to break, and so she let her gratitude shine through her eyes. Mr. Whitman sat rigid in his chair, but something in him had shifted. His hands, usually so precise, fumbled as he straightened the papers on his desk. He felt exposed, as though every person in that bank could see not just the man he was, but the man he might have been if pride hadn't ruled him for so long. When Clara turned to leave, the sun poured through the tall glass doors, spilling golden light across her path. Each step felt lighter, as though the burden she carried, grief, exhaustion, rejection, had been met halfway by something greater than herself. Kindness. Courage. Humanity. The soldier held the door for her, offering nothing more than a respectful nod as she passed. But his small gesture meant everything. It was proof that compassion didn't need ceremony to be powerful. Back inside, the bank slowly resumed its rhythm, the shuffling of papers, the stamping of forms, the murmurs of customers. Yet something lingered in the air, a gentleness that hadn't been there before. People looked at one another differently now, as if reminded that they shared more than space, they shared responsibility. Whitman remained at his desk, but he was no longer the same man who had dismissed Clara minutes earlier. Her dignity, the soldier's boldness, and the eyes of the community had pierced through his armor. He sat back, staring at the empty counter where Clara's check had lain, realizing that in bending the rules, he had bent something far greater, his own heart. And it hadn't broken. It had opened. He whispered to himself, almost a confession, kindness costs less than pride. The words surprised him, but they felt truer than anything he had said in years. Outside, Clara walked into the brightness of day, her purse heavier but her spirit lighter. The world had not changed overnight, but in one small corner of it, something had shifted. She carried not just money now, but hope that compassion could still rise where pride once stood. And somewhere inside that quiet bank, a man who had built his life on rules was beginning to learn that the greatest rule of all is mercy.